Dan is 18 and lives with his parents. Due to his complex needs, he currently attends a residential placement at Sunfield School in Stourbridge. However, Dan's placement will come to an end next summer, and so Gemma, his transition coordinator, is currently working with Dan and his family to help them plan for his future.
Dan was originally referred to our project for help with planning his move from residential school onto either college or a residential placement. So my work's involved going out and gathering information from all the professionals and people working with Dan, and doing a lot of work with his mum and dad to formulate a transition plan.
Dan's never had a transition plan. He's always been in a situation where things have not worked out or have gone horribly wrong, and then we've had to find an emergency placement for Dan, and it's been firefighting, so we've never had a chance to plan. We've been looking for something in a really dreadful emergency situation and just gone with that. So this is quite a fantastic change to have a chance to plan for the future and to prepare Dan, because for people with learning disabilities, especially autism, any change is extremely distressing, and it can actually have some quite disastrous consequences if it's sprung on them.
Due to the fact that Dan has communication difficulties, it's been really important to gather as much information as possible from the people that know him the best, to make sure that all the things that are important to him are listed in the plan, and the support that he needs to achieve those things is specified in that plan as well.
Gemma's been absolutely fantastic. She comes over and we will talk through what Dan's needs are. She will look into what's available or how we can actually explore areas that aren't necessarily the norm, so that we can find something that will actually suit Dan and something that we can set up to succeed rather than just hope for the best, or indeed set it up to fail, which is another thing that can happen because resources are so scarce. And I think also there just is a gap. There's a sort of hole in services between child services and adult services, which Gemma seems to be bridging, which is great news both for parents and for the person who's reaching adulthood.
With regards to Dan's actual move from school onto his next placement, we'll do a lot of work around preparing Dan for that move. So hopefully myself and his key worker can work together to produce social stories explaining the move.
If he gets wind of a change or feels that his present situation is threatened in any way, then it can distress him greatly. So we sort of go at it sideways and talk about what he enjoys and what he'd like to do now he's a man. But we have to be very, very careful.
Once a placement has been identified, John, Dan's key worker at school, will play a significant part in preparing Dan for his transition. During Dan's final 3 months at school, John will develop a social story that he'll use with Dan to help him understand where he will go after he leaves school. Dan's social story will be created in a book and will include symbols, pictures and photos of himself, his interests, the new placement, the people that he'll live with, and the staff who will look after him. John will introduce the story to Dan by reading it with him once a day, and this will then increase to at least 2 or 3 times a day, just to get Dan used to the fact his life is about to change. Dan's social story will include short sentences of text that will be read to Dan to help him understand his own social story. All of this work will help to familiarise him with his new surroundings and the people that he'll meet before the move happens, helping to make the process of transition as smooth as possible for Dan and his family. John will also use Dan's social story to reinforce the fact that he'll still be able to do the activities he enjoys even though he's left school. It will also help him to understand the reasons why the time has come for him to leave Sunfield, and it's likely that this part of Dan's story will look something like this. Men do not live at Beach House. Dan is now a man. Dan will now live at his new house because Dan is a man. Due to Dan's limited verbal communication, John and his colleagues at Sunfield are introducing the use of PEC symbols and cue cards to aid Dan's understanding and ability to communicate about the choices he makes in his life and the world around him. The use of PECs will help Dan ensure that people understand his needs and wants, and also give him the opportunity to improve his verbal communication at a level to which he feels confident and comfortable to talk.
We are going to have lunch in the main house, and we are after lunch. Where are you going?
School.
Excellent stuff.
When your child is a child, everything, even with special needs, you feel there are endless possibilities, even within a narrow range. But once the adult Mark comes along, everything seems to change in the way the world works around them. So to see that perhaps accommodation might be made for what they want, to see their hopes, their fears, their aspirations actually taken into account and given importance is immensely encouraging for us as a family, for every parent, I would say.
The actual transition for Dan from school to his next placement is going to be really important that we get everything correct, because he's had so many negative transitions previously. Hopefully this transition plan will lay out all of the support he needs to make this a successful one, and a lot of time needs to be taken over preparing Dan for that move, because any change is really, really hard for Dan. And he needs to know exactly when things are going to happen and what the change is going to involve to prepare him for that move. We'll have transition meetings, and Dan will go and have taster sessions at the placement. And the staff from the placement will go and visit Dan at school so that everybody becomes really familiar with Dan and his needs.